Ruby Messina, and I will be presenting Hatshepsut, born in 1470 BC. She is the sister queen pharaoh and known to all as the queen who became king. Eighteenth Dynasty, 1479 to 1458 BCE. Born a princess in ancient Egypt to Pharaoh Thutmose I and great wife Ahmose. She had two siblings, Nefertiti and Thutmose II, who is her half-brother. After the death of her father, Thutmose I, she married Thutmose II, her half-brother, at the age of 12, giving her the position as God's wife of a nun. God's wife of a nun is one of the most highest prestigious titles in the 18th dynasty, only given to wives titled queens. It is the highest ruling position for a queen and a wife, giving them the second hand to the king, making them like a king, pretty much. So it was one of the highest queen positions. Shortly after, at the age of 15, the king dies, as Hatshepsut raises toddler stepson Thutmose III and daughter Nefertiti. Thutmose III was named successor after his father, but because he was still a child, Hatshepsut became regent, controlling the affairs of the state. After the death of her mother at the age of 22 and 7 years of regency, Egypt prospered and rules were changed. Hatshepsut takes the throne as a woman pharaoh, Ma'at Karat pharaoh of Upper and Lower Egypt, which was mentioned in her coronation, where she ruled as a man and ruled one of the largest kingdoms at the time. She also wore a regalia of kingship dress, which was radical in the sense that she was becoming king and again ruling as a man, but also it was a radical demise to her stepson, who was the successor. Contributions. Hatshepsut's contributions were also her accomplishments. Wanted to ensure prosperity was the ultimate accomplishment. She also extended trade, wanted to restore buildings and build new ones. She was not interested in conquering new lands, but she did possibly have a short military campaign in Nubia. Most of the military overseeing was done by Thutmose III, but as mentioned prior, her kingdom prospered, and it was for many years while she was in reign. She's also famous for her building program being one of the largest and one of the reasons why her country prospered. And this was a way for her to spoil her people. Here are some of the examples of buildings that she restored or built. The most famous ones, the Chapelle Rouge, or the Red Chapel. Then you've got the Temple of Paquette, and the most famous of them all is Hatshepsut's obelisk. And here is an image of one of the ones that are still standing. Social challenges. Her leadership was a challenge because she was known for being radical. Everything she did was radical. So radicalism is of her nature. And I think it also has to do with the fact that she grew very close with her father, and she took a lot of notes growing up. So one of the things that I mentioned before was that when she was wife to Thutmose II, that her ultimate title was God's wife of Anon, that being the ultimate title for a queen. So what she did was she went and passed that title to her daughter. And I have noted here, Hatshepsut began her reign by marrying her daughter to Thutmose III and bestowing on Refa-Ru-Ra the position of God's wife of Anon in order to secure her position. So there's a comic right next door that says, those low-born wretches and their waging tongues, what do they know? And that's Hatshepsut already implementing these ideas to her daughter, and by her marrying her off to Thutmose III was securing that position for her to become king, to take her reign. So what she was doing was passing her legacy on to her daughter so her daughter could become king. And in the real world at the time, it was only passed down from one male to another. That's why if you were born a daughter first, it would be given to a son. And if the son was not from the queen and from another person, from another wife, then they would take that first heir of the firstborn son to take over. Either way. So for women, this was not the ideal view of seeing a woman become a king, and she was already making plans for her daughter to become king. So with that, her statuary showed her in all her royal grandeur in the forefront, with Thutmose III rendered on a smaller scale behind below her to indicate his low statue. She still referred to her stepson as the king, but he was so in the name only. So this is insinuating that she also had a lot of statues and art that had her face, and she would call herself king, but she would also call her stepson king. Significance in studying. Hatshepsut is significant in studying because she is a very strong, prominent woman who ruled the Golden Age, which is one of the most prosperous ages of Egypt. She's also a King Tut's great-granddaughter and her ancestor. So that proves how strong her lineage is, on top of being part of the 18th dynasty, which is one of the most strongest dynasties of leadership. She is celebrated as a powerful female ruler whose reign was extremely successful, and this is the same reason for the controversy according to Egyptian tradition. No woman should have been able to assume the full power of a pharaoh. She is also ancient Egypt's unsolved mystery, meaning that after her passing, she was later moved out of her tomb due to tomb raiding and thieves. So she was put in another sacred location, and because she was put in another sacred location, people kind of forgot about her. And going back to her, where she was first located, her grave site was trashed. And on top of being trashed, her image which was well marketed throughout her kingdom, was also removed from art, from statues, from anything you can think of. They were removing her from history. Now, the theory behind this, historians have found results over the years and recent, but the theory was that maybe it was her stepson, Thutmose III, who had tried to remove her from history because he was grudging due to her rule. But in reality, it was her grandson, Thutmose IV, that played part in wanting to preserve the image of a male ruler. So it had nothing to do with her grandeur or her ruling. It had to do with her being a woman, and they wanted to keep that image going of being a man. Contributions to studying of Africana persons. Hatshepsut is a very controversial person, but she also played a huge part throughout Africa, again through trade and prosperity, not just through Egypt, but through African communities. She is elite, and she is a woman, so she took responsibility for her country and did it in her image. But she ensured that prosperity throughout neighboring communities were of priority. She changed regulations, but kept her servitude to traditional when it came down to coronation rituals, and presented herself as king of her monarch. She opened trade all throughout Africa. Here to the left, you see a quote which says, "I have commanded that my titulary abide like the mountains. When the sun shines, its rays are bright upon the titulary of my majesty. My Horus is high upon the standard forever." Here, Hatshepsut is saying that her grandeur, she's talking about her image and her title and who she is, being the pharaoh and being the king, is much high. She is given these abilities from God himself, and with that she is able to bring light and sun shines to her kingdom, and that's what she did. She did that through building, through restoration of buildings, and spoiling her community, spoiling her kingdom. She did that very well, with using that intuitive part of her as being a woman, but also fulfilling it through being a king, or portraying that of a king. And if you move on to the next, there's a little comic strip here, or a little comic here that says, Hatshepsut assumed the title of Pharaoh and ruled like a man for her actions to her dress. So everything about her is her face, but her being the king, her being the man, pretty much. Her even dressing like it to fulfill that respect for herself, and so she is looked at as majestic.